Didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a single door. That's what people don't understand when I tell them what happened. They expect me to say I lost it, that I finally blew up after years of swallowing things I shouldn't have swallowed. But that's not how it went. When the moment came, the moment that changed everything, I was completely calm, almost eerily calm. Like something in me had already made the decision long before my mind caught up to it. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I was 63 years old, recently retired from 31 years in commercial insurance, and I had spent the better part of the last 4 years quietly funding a life that was never mine. My wife. I'll call her my wife. Though by the time you finish reading this, that word will feel different. Her name is Renata. We met at a church potluck in Dayton, Ohio, of all places, 7 years ago. She was warm, funny in a dry way that caught me off guard. She had a laugh that made a room feel smaller, in the best sense. I was a widower. She was divorced. We were both in our mid-50s, and neither of us was looking for anything complicated. She had a son. She told me about him on our third date, over pulled pork at a place on Brown Street. His name was Cole, 27 at the time. She said he was finding his footing. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of young people take time to get settled. I'd seen it with my own nephews. What I didn't fully understand then, what I told myself I understood but didn't, was that Cole had been finding his footing for quite a while already, and that Renata had been the ground beneath his feet for all of it. We got married 18 months after that potluck. Small ceremony. Her sister flew in from Phoenix. My brother drove up from Cincinnati. It was a good day. I remember thinking that the hardest part of starting over was already behind me. Cole moved into the spare bedroom 6 weeks after the wedding. Renata framed it as temporary. He'd had a falling out with his roommates, she said. He just needed a few months to save up. I said, fine. I meant it when I said it. What I didn't say, what I kept folded up inside me like a piece of paper I kept meaning to throw away, was that Cole had never once looked me in the eye when he spoke to me. Not at the wedding, not at the wedding, not at Christmas the year before. Not at any of the dinners where Renata would set a place for him, and he'd show up 30 minutes late and eat without saying thank you and leave before the dishes were cleared. I told myself it was just his way. I told myself he'd come around. I cooked breakfast most mornings because I was the one who woke up early. I'd make enough for 3. Cole would come downstairs around 10, pour himself coffee, and look at whatever I'd left covered on the stove like it was a minor inconvenience. He never said thank you. Not once, not in 4 years. I paid the mortgage. I paid the utilities. When Renata's car needed new brakes, I paid for that. When Cole's phone bill came due and he was between things, Renata would mention it quietly in passing, the way she'd mention needing milk, and I would add it to the total without making it a thing. I kept a mental number. I'm embarrassed to admit how precise it was. But after 31 years in insurance, numbers are how I process the world. By the time everything fell apart, that number was somewhere north of $42,000. Not counting food, not counting the utilities he ran up streaming video games until 2 in the morning. The thing about tolerating disrespect for a long time is that you start to feel it in your body before you can name it in words. I'd get a tightness in my chest when I heard Cole's footsteps on the stairs. I'd find reasons to stay in the garage longer than I needed to. I bought a small workbench and started doing woodworking, mostly because it gave me somewhere to be that wasn't the living room. Renata noticed. She'd ask if I was okay. I'd say I was fine, and then I'd go sand something that didn't need sanding. The birthday party was Cole's idea. He was turning 31 in March and he wanted a dinner, not just a small family thing, a dinner with people at the house catered. He sent Renata a list of what he wanted. She showed it to me like it was a grocery receipt, already assuming I'd cover it. I said yes. I don't know why. Maybe because I was still hoping that a gesture would change something. That's the thing about people who keep the peace. They keep believing the peace is leading somewhere. I spent 2 days organizing things. Ordered food from a place in Oakwood that Cole had specified. Bought a cake from a bakery on Far Hills, the good one with the buttercream. Drove across town in the rain to pick it up myself because the delivery window didn't work with Renata's schedule. I was setting the cake box on the kitchen counter when Cole walked in from wherever he'd been. He looked at it. He looked at me. And then, not with anger, not with heat, just with a kind of flat certainty that was somehow worse than either, He said, "You know what would actually make this birthday good? If you weren't here for it." He said it the way you'd say I'd prefer the window seat. Casual. Like it was just a preference he was stating. I didn't say anything. I set the cake box down on the counter. I straightened it so it was square with the edge, and then I walked upstairs. Renata was in the bedroom folding laundry. She had the TV on low, some home renovation show. She didn't look up when I came in. "Did you pick up the cake?" she asked. "It's on the counter," I said. She nodded. "Good. His friends are coming around 6. I stood in the doorway for a moment. I looked at her folding a pillowcase that had a small blue stripe on the edge. I remember that detail specifically, I don't know why. And I thought, she is not going to ask me how I'm doing. She is not going to notice that something just happened. And if I tell her, she is going to find a way to explain it. I said, "I'm going to run out for a bit." She said, "Okay, don't be too long." I went to the garage and sat in my truck for about 10 minutes. Then I drove to my brother's house on the other side of town. My brother is a quiet man. He poured me a glass of iced tea and sat across from me at his kitchen table and listened while I talked for about 45 minutes. When I was done, he didn't tell me what to do. He just said, "You've been chewing on this for a long time, haven't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What do you want to do?" And I realized, sitting there at his kitchen table with a glass of iced tea going warm in my hand, that I already knew. I didn't go back that night. I called Renata and told her I wasn't feeling well, and that she should go ahead with the dinner without me. She sounded annoyed, but she didn't push. I slept in my brother's guest room and lay awake most of the night staring at the ceiling, not upset exactly, just very, very clear. The next morning I drove to my bank before it opened and sat in the parking lot. When the doors unlocked at 9, I went in and asked to speak with someone about separating a joint checking account. I want to be clear about something. I did not drain the account. I moved my direct deposit, my pension and my investment distributions, to a personal account that Renata was not on. I left enough in the joint account to cover the mortgage payment that was due. I wasn't trying to harm her. I was trying to stop being invisible. I also called the insurance company that handled Cole's phone plan, which was under my name and my payment information, and I removed him from it. That's all I did that first day. 2 phone calls and a bank visit. I went to a diner afterward and ate eggs and wheat toast and read the newspaper, the actual paper copy, which I hadn't done in months because mornings at the house were always something to get through rather than something to enjoy. My phone started ringing around noon. Renata called 3 times. I let them go to voicemail. Her messages started calm and got less calm. By the 3rd one, she said she'd driven past my brother's house and seen my truck, and she needed me to call her back. I called her back that evening. She said, "What is happening?" I said, "I think you know what happened." Long pause. "Cole said something," she said finally. "It wasn't a question. He did." Another pause. "He doesn't always think before he speaks." "He's 31 years old," I said. "He's been not thinking before he speaks for as long as I've known him, and I'd been covering for it for 4 years. She started to say something about how he'd had a hard time, how his father had never been around, how she'd done the best she could, and I listened to all of it. I'd heard most of it before, and when she finished I said very quietly, "None of that is my fault, Renata, and none of that is my responsibility. I have tried to build something with him for 4 years. I have paid for his phone, his food, his roof. I have made breakfast he didn't acknowledge. I have been treated like furniture in my own house. And when I handed him a birthday cake I drove across town in the rain to pick up, he told me he'd prefer I didn't exist." She said, "He didn't mean it like that." I said, "I think he meant exactly that." I stayed at my brother's for 5 days. Renata called every day. On the 3rd day, Cole texted me, the first time he'd ever texted me in 4 years, and said he hadn't meant to hurt my feelings. I read it twice. I put my phone face down on the table and went outside and pulled some reeds out of my brother's garden bed, which badly needed attention. Renata came to my brother's house on the 4th day. He let her in and then found somewhere else to be, which I appreciated. We sat in the living room. She had brought a dish she'd made, a chicken thing I'd always liked, and she set it on the coffee table like a small peace offering. I looked at it for a moment. She said, "I want you to come home." I said, I need some things to change before I can do that. What things? I told her. I said I needed Cole to have a move-out date. Not an idea of a date. A date. 6 months was reasonable. I said I needed her to acknowledge out loud that what he said to me was not acceptable and that she should have said so herself when I told her. I said I needed the joint account to work differently, that I would contribute to shared expenses, but that I was not going to be an ATM for a grown man who resented my presence. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You've been thinking about this for a while." "I've been thinking about this for 4 years," I said. She cried a little. Not dramatically. Renata isn't a dramatic person, which is something I'd always liked about her. She dabbed at her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. She said she was sorry. She said she knew she'd let things slide in ways she shouldn't have. I told her that I appreciated her saying that, but that I needed more than an apology. I needed to see it change. She nodded. She said she'd talk to Cole. "I need to be there for that conversation," I said. She looked surprised. "You want to be in the room?" "He needs to hear it from both of us, not just you, and then a summary later." She agreed. I went back to the house 2 days after that. I want to be honest, I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. Part of me was still standing in that kitchen watching myself set down a cake box, feeling the particular kind of quiet that comes after something shifts permanently. I had spent most of my adult life believing that if you were patient enough, if you were steady enough, things would level out, and I was starting to wonder if that belief had cost me more than it had ever returned. But I went back. Because Renata mattered to me, because I wasn't ready to be done, not yet. The conversation with Cole happened on a Sunday. He sat on one end of the couch with his arms crossed. Renata sat beside him. I sat in the chair across from them. Renata told him that what he'd said was unacceptable, that I was her husband, that I had been nothing but generous to this family, and that I deserved to be treated with basic dignity. She said it clearly, and she didn't soften it the way I'd feared she would. Cole stared at the carpet for most of it. When she finished, he looked up and said, "I get it." He looked at me. He said, "I'm sorry." I nodded. I didn't say it's fine, because it wasn't fine. I said, "Thank you for saying that." He moved out 4 months later, not 6. He got a job, a real one, full-time with benefits, at a logistics company in Miamisburg. Renato told me about it like she was reporting good news, and I suppose it was. I said that was good. I meant it. Something settled after that. Mornings felt different. I still made breakfast, but now it was for 2 people who were actually present for it. Renata started getting up earlier, which surprised me. She'd pour her coffee and sit at the kitchen table while I cooked, and we'd actually talk, in a way we hadn't since the early months of the marriage. But I want to be honest about the parts that didn't fully heal, because this isn't that kind of story. There's a version of this where I tell you everything went back to normal, where I say the conversation on that Sunday fixed it all, and Cole became a different person, and Renata and I rebuilt something even stronger. Maybe some of that is true, parts of it, but I still think about that moment in the kitchen. The cake box, the rain I'd driven through, the way he said it. Not angry, not even particularly unkind in his tone, just matter of fact, like my absence was a reasonable preference. I think about it more than I think I should. I wonder sometimes if it changed how I see this house. If the house changed how I see myself in it. I had an envelope sitting on my desk for about 3 weeks after I came back. My attorney had drawn it up, just drawn it up, at my request, so I'd have it if I needed it. Separation paperwork. I never gave it to Renata. I still haven't. It's in the filing cabinet in the study now, second drawer, behind the home warranty documents. I don't know what I'm keeping it for exactly. Maybe I'm keeping it as a reminder that I made a choice to stay, not because I had nowhere to go. That matters to me more than I can fully explain. That I chose this, that I'm still choosing it every morning when I get up and make enough eggs for 2. But I'm not the same man who set that cake box down on the counter and straightened it square with the edge. Something moved in me that afternoon. Something that moved and didn't move back. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it might be the first honest thing that's happened to me in years. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. That's one thing retirement gives you that nobody warns you about. Time. time to replay things, time to notice what you were too busy to see when you were still in the middle of it. What I keep coming back to is this. I wasn't a victim of Cole's cruelty. Not entirely. I was, for a long time, a participant in my own erasure. Every morning I made that breakfast and left it covered on the stove. Every month I paid that breakfast and left it covered on the stove. Every time Renata mentioned something Cole needed, and I just quietly added it to the running total in my head without saying anything. I was teaching both of them that my silence meant consent, that my patience had no bottom, that I could be leaned on indefinitely and would never push back. People talk about disrespect, like it arrives all at once, like someone just decides one day to treat you badly. That hasn't matched my experience. It comes in slowly. It comes in small. A thank you that doesn't happen. A door that doesn't get held. A name that stops being used. And if you let each small thing pass, because you're keeping the peace, because you love someone, because you tell yourself it'll get better, you eventually look up and realize the small things have stacked into something you can barely see over. Cole saying what he said at that kitchen counter was not the cause of what happened. It was the result. It was the natural endpoint of 4 years of me signaling, through my silence and my generosity and my endless accommodation, that there would be no consequence for how he treated me. He said it because nothing in his experience of me had suggested he shouldn't. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not his words, my role in making them possible. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from books or schooling. It comes from being willing to be honest with yourself, even when the honest answer is uncomfortable. I had spent 4 years being a smart man who was not being honest with himself. I knew the dynamic was wrong. I could feel it in my chest every time I heard his footsteps. But I kept choosing the easier path, the path of letting it go, of telling myself next month would be different, because the alternative required me to have a hard conversation I wasn't sure I was ready for. What I learned, sitting at my brother's kitchen table with a glass of iced tea going warm in my hand, is that waiting for the right moment to stand up for yourself is usually just another way of not standing up for yourself. The moment doesn't arrive on its own. You have to decide that now is it, even when now feels inconvenient, even when now means disruption. I also learned something about what it means to truly care for someone. I thought I was caring for Renata by keeping things smooth, by absorbing the friction, by not making Cole's presence in our home into an ongoing conflict. But what I was actually doing was making it easier for her to avoid a reckoning she needed to have with her own son. My silence wasn't protecting her. It was protecting the arrangement, and the arrangement was not working for anyone in the long run, not even for Cole, who at 31 still hadn't been asked to fully stand on his own. When things did shift, they shifted because actions changed, not because apologies were exchanged. Cole got a job. Cole moved out. Renata started getting up earlier and sitting at the table while I cooked. Those are small things, but they're the kind of small things that matter, the kind that accumulate in the right direction for once. I still have that envelope in the filing cabinet. I don't take it out, but I don't throw it away either. I think I need it there to remind me that staying is a choice I make every morning, not an obligation I'm trapped in. That distinction between choosing something and being stuck with it turns out to matter more to me than I ever would have predicted. I'm not the same man I was before that afternoon. I think I'm a little less accommodating and a little more honest. I think that's probably what I should have been all along.